The morning of September 12, 1942, Charter Towers Airfield, Queensland, Australia. The heat rises in waves off the tarmac as a Douglas A-20 Havoc light bomber taxis toward a makeshift hangar constructed from corrugated tin and hope. Inside that hangar, a 43-year-old man with grease-stained hands and fire in his eyes is about to change the Pacific War. His name is Paul Irvin Gunn. Everyone calls him Pappy. In 6 hours, the aircraft he's modified will attack a Japanese airfield at Buna, New Guinea. If his modifications work, American bombers will finally have the teeth they need to tear into Japanese shipping and ground installations. If they fail, men will die, and the innovative old pilot will be remembered as the fool who wasted precious time and resources on a crackpot idea. But Pappy Gunn isn't thinking about failure. He's thinking about his wife and 4 children, trapped 1,700 miles north in a Japanese internment camp at Santo Tomas in Manila. He's thinking about the convoy of Japanese transports he watched slip past American forces last week because no aircraft could get low enough, slow enough, and deadly enough to stop them. He's thinking about how a medium bomber designed to drop ordnance from 12,000 feet might be transformed into something the Japanese have never seen before. A low-level strafing monster that can shred ships, suppress anti-aircraft fire, and turn enemy airfields into graveyards. This is not the story of advanced technology solving a military problem. This is the story of a blacksmith's son from Arkansas who, armed with nothing but wrecked fighter planes, hand tools, and a desperate need to end a war that held his family hostage, turned America's medium bombers into the most feared gunships in the Pacific. This is the story of how improvisation defeated engineering, how necessity mothered an invention that would define close air support for generations, and how one man's fury transformed aluminum and guns into a weapon that would help shatter the Japanese Empire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The North American B-25 Mitchell bomber was never supposed to be a gunship. When it rolled off the production line at the North American Aviation Plant in Inglewood, California in 1941, it was designed as a medium bomber, a workhorse aircraft meant to deliver substantial bomb loads economically and accurately from moderate altitudes between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. Twin Wright R-2600 engines, 64 feet from nose to tail, 95-foot wingspan, loaded weight of 33,000 pounds, maximum speed of 230 miles per hour, range of 1,300 miles. The Mitchell was a solid, reliable aircraft, named after Brigadier General William "Billy" Mitchell, the charismatic air power prophet, who proved in 1921 that planes could sink battleships. It carried a crew of 6, pilot, co-pilot, bombardier/navigator, radio operator, and 2 gunners. Its defensive armament included a tail gun, a dorsal turret, and a ventral gun tray that took almost a minute to extend, by which time a Zero fighter could make 3 attack passes. The waist guns posed as much danger to the Mitchell's own vertical tails and engine nacelles as they did to enemy fighters. The aircraft was thoroughly conventional, thoroughly tested, and thoroughly inadequate for the kind of war being fought in the Southwest Pacific in 1942. In the jungles and islands of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, altitude was a luxury American bomber crews could rarely afford. The jungle environment reduced the usefulness of medium-level bombing. Flying at 10,000 feet, a bombardier might spot a ship, an airfield, or a supply dump, but actually hitting it through the dense canopy in the face of anti-aircraft fire while being harassed by Zeros was another matter entirely. Bombs dropped from altitude scattered, Many disappeared into the jungle without detonating. Others landed harmlessly in water. The few that found targets often caused minimal damage because they lacked the precision to strike vulnerable points. Meanwhile, Japanese supply convoys were running nightly, sustaining isolated garrisons, reinforcing threatened positions, and delivering troops and equipment throughout their sprawling Pacific empire. American submarines were taking a toll, but submarines couldn't be everywhere. The U.S. Army Air Forces needed a way to hammer these convoys from the air, to deny the Japanese the freedom of movement that geography seemed to grant them. They needed aircraft that could fly low, loiter over targets, suppress defensive fire, and deliver devastating attacks against ships and shore installations. The problem was that no such aircraft existed in the American inventory in mid-1942. Fighters like the P-40 Warhawk and P-39 Airacobra had the speed and maneuverability for low-level attacks, but they lacked the range, the punch, and the survivability to sustain operations against well-defended targets. Heavy bombers, like the B-17 Flying Fortress, were designed for high-altitude strategic bombing, not low-level ship-busting. Light bombers like the Douglas A-20 Havoc showed promise, but they were in short supply. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber was available in increasing numbers, but it was designed for a completely different mission profile. What the 5th Air Force needed was an aircraft that combined the range and payload of a medium bomber with the forward-firing punch of a fighter. They needed something that could approach targets at wave-top height, suppress anti-aircraft fire with streams of heavy machine gun fire, and then either strafe the target to pieces or skip bomb it with 500-pound bombs released so low they bounced across the water like stones before slamming into ship hulls below the waterline. They needed a gunship, and they needed it in weeks, not months, not years, because every week of delay meant more Japanese supply runs, more reinforced positions, or dead American and Australian soldiers on jungle battlefields, where air support meant the difference between survival and annihilation. Enter Major General George C. Kenney, who arrived in Australia in August 1942 to take command of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific Theatre. Kenney was 53 years old, a veteran of the First World War, and a man with no patience for orthodoxy when orthodoxy was getting his men killed. He immediately began touring his scattered bases, looking for solutions to the tactical problems that were bleeding his bomber force white. At Charter Towers Airfield, south of Townsville in Queensland, he found something interesting. A grease-stained former Navy pilot in his early 40s, working in a shelter on a Douglas A-20 Havoc, converting it from a light bomber into something else entirely. Paul Irvin Gunn, called Pappy by everyone who knew him, because at 43 he was ancient by Air Force standards, was unlike any officer Kenney had ever met. Gunn had enlisted in the Navy in 1918, served 21 years as an aviation mechanic and then a naval aviation pilot, and retired in December 1939 as a chief petty officer. He was an expert in low-level flying, a gifted aircraft mechanic, and a man who understood airplanes the way a blacksmith understands iron because he could shape them with his hands. After leaving the Navy, Gunn had moved his family to the Philippines, where he helped start Philippine Airlines, flying 5 privately owned Beechcraft aircraft on cargo and passenger routes throughout the islands. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Gunn was in Manila. Major General Louis Brereton, commander of the Far East Air Force, immediately commandeered Philippine Airlines aircraft and personnel. Gunn was sworn into the Army Air Corps as a captain, given command of a makeshift air transport squadron, and ordered to evacuate military personnel from Japanese-held territory. For the next 6 weeks, Gunn flew mission after mission into hostile airspace in unarmored Beechcraft planes, bringing out pilots, ferrying supplies to besieged troops on Bataan, and performing feats of low-level flying that earned him a reputation as either the bravest or the craziest pilot in the Philippines. He survived being shot down once, crashing into a coconut plantation and being rescued by the plantation owner, someone he'd flown as a passenger during peacetime. Eventually, in late January 1942, Gunn flew one of the last aircraft out of the Philippines to Australia, carrying key personnel to safety. But he left something behind. His wife, Clara Louise, and their 4 children Nathaniel, Connie, Julie, and Paul Jr. were trapped in Manila when the city fell. On January 20th, 1942, the Japanese rounded up American and Allied civilians and interned them at the University of Santo Tomas. Pappy Gunn's family would remain prisoners there for 3 years, living on starvation rations, subject to brutal discipline, slowly wasting away while he fought from Australia, unable to reach them, unable to protect them, able only to kill as many Japanese as possible in the desperate hope that ending the war faster might save their lives. This was the man General Kenny found working on an A-20 in a tin shelter at Charter Towers in August 1942. This was the man who, when asked what he was doing, explained that he was installing 4 .50 caliber machine guns into the bombardier's nose, replacing the transparent plexiglass with solid metal, and transforming the light bomber into a low-level strafer that could suppress anti-aircraft fire and tear enemy aircraft and installations to pieces. Kenny asked where Gunn had gotten the machine guns. Gunn explained that he was scavenging them from wrecked fighters, scattered across Australian airfields, P-40 Warhawks, and P-39 Airacobras damaged beyond repair, but with functional weapons. The 5th Air Force supply of .50 caliber machine guns was severely limited throughout the Southwest Pacific. There were never enough. So Gunn did what any good mechanic does. He improvised. He found wrecks. He salvaged guns. He fabricated mounts. He tested, adjusted, tested again. He made it work because making it work was the only option. General Kenny was impressed. This old sailor understood something that headquarters staff in comfortable offices never would. That war is not won by following procedures, but by solving problems, and that the best solutions often come from people who know their tools intimately enough to bend them to new purposes. Kenny immediately placed Gunn on his personal staff as Special Projects Officer and gave him a simple mandate: convert more aircraft, make them deadlier, do it fast. Gunn set to work with a fury that astonished everyone around him. He wasn't just an engineer solving a technical problem. He was a father trying to save his family by shortening a war. Every aircraft he modified, every sortie that aircraft flew, every Japanese ship sunk or airfield destroyed, brought the war closer to Manila, closer to Santo Tomas, closer to his wife and children. Fury is a powerful motivator. Desperation is an even more powerful engineer. By early September 1942, Gunn had converted several A-20s into strafers. The modifications were crude but effective. 4 .50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns mounted in the nose, solid metal panels replacing the bombardier's transparent station, additional ammunition storage, bomb racks modified to carry parachute fragmentation bombs, small bombs slowed by parachutes so the attacking aircraft could escape the blast radius even at ultra-low altitude. The parafrag bombs would float gently down over enemy airfields and installations, exploding above parked aircraft and fuel dumps. showering them with red-hot fragments and white phosphorus that set fire to everything the fragments touched. The converted A-20s were tested in combat on September 12, 1942, in a raid against the Japanese airfield at Buna, New Guinea. The results exceeded every expectation. Flying at wave-top height and treetop level, the strafers roared in before defenders could react, suppressing anti-aircraft fire with streams of 50-caliber armor-piercing rounds, then releasing their parafrag bombs directly over the target. Japanese fighters caught on the ground exploded, fuel dumps detonated, buildings disintegrated. The lightly constructed Japanese aircraft, built for agility and range, not armor, tore apart under the half-inch bullets traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The strafers pulled up and away, leaving behind a trail of destruction that looked like the wrath of an angry god. General Kenny immediately ordered Gunn to do the same thing to the B-25 Mitchell. This was a bigger challenge. The A-20 was a light bomber, relatively small, relatively easy to modify. The B-25 was a medium bomber, larger, more complex, with different aerodynamics and structural considerations. Adding weight to the nose of an aircraft affects its center of gravity, which affects its stability and handling. Installing guns creates recoil forces that must be absorbed by the airframe. Modifying a bomber designed for high-altitude level flight to perform low-level strafing runs meant accepting risks that no engineer at North American Aviation would have approved. But Pappy Gunn didn't work for North American Aviation. He worked for General Kenny. And General Kenny didn't care about what the manual said was possible. He cared about what needed to be done. Gunn was assisted by Jack Fox, a North American Aviation technical representative based at Charter Towers. Fox sent drawings of Gunn's proposed modifications back to the factory in Long Beach, California. But there were too few B-25s in the theater to spare any for modification experiments yet. The first B-25s were needed for conventional bombing missions. Gunn would have to wait for more aircraft to arrive before he could begin the conversions that would define the rest of the Pacific Air War. The waiting was agony. Every day meant more supply runs, more reinforcements, more American soldiers dying on jungle battlefields, more time his family spent in that internment camp. Gunn flew combat missions himself, testing his A-20 conversions, refining the tactics, and proving the concept. He flew more missions than almost any other man in theater, accumulating combat hours and enemy kills, earning 2 distinguished flying crosses, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Air Medal, and eventually 9 Purple Hearts, 9 separate wounds. 9 times he bled in combat and kept flying. By late 1942, B-25 Mitchells were arriving in Australia in greater numbers. General Kenny authorized Gunn to begin the conversion program. Working with a small team of mechanics, Gunn established a B-25 conversion center at Townsville. The modifications were extensive. Remove the transparent bombardier's nose. Replace it with solid metal panels. Install 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in the nose, 4 in underwing blisters or fuselage packages. Some aircraft received additional guns, 2 more forward-firing guns in cheek blisters on either side of the nose, bringing the total forward-firing armament to 10 or even 12 heavy machine guns. Add the dorsal turret's 2 guns, which could be synchronized to fire forward with the fixed guns, and some B-25s could bring 14 50-caliber machine guns to bear on a target simultaneously. 14 50-caliber machine guns. Each gun fires 850 rounds per minute. Each round a half-inch diameter armor-piercing projectile traveling at 2,900 feet per second. 14 guns equaled 11,900 rounds per minute, nearly 200 rounds per second, creating a cone of destruction so dense that anything caught within it simply disintegrated. The conversions took time, weeks, not overnight. Not a single desperate night of improvisation, but a sustained program of modification and testing. Each aircraft had to be carefully modified to maintain structural integrity. The guns had to be aligned, tested, adjusted. Ammunition feed systems had to be installed and debugged. Pilots had to learn new tactics for an aircraft that now handled differently, weighed more in the nose, and required different flying techniques to compensate for the weight of all those guns and all that ammunition. But the results, when they came, were devastating. The first squadron of Strafer B-25s was ready for combat in early 1943. They would prove their worth in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, one of the most one-sided victories in the history of naval aviation. A battle that would demonstrate beyond any doubt that Pappy Gunn's jury-rigged gunships had changed the Pacific War forever. The first days of March, 1943, intelligence reports reached General Kenny's headquarters in Port Moresby, New Guinea. A Japanese convoy is assembling at Rabaul 8 transport ships, carrying nearly 7,000 troops, escorted by 8 destroyers. Destination: Lae, New Guinea, where Japanese forces are under pressure from Allied advances. The convoy represents a massive reinforcement effort, enough troops to turn the tide of the ground campaign, and enough supplies to sustain Japanese resistance for months. General Kenny knows what he has to do. The convoy must be destroyed, not damaged, not delayed, destroyed. Every ship, every soldier, every ton of supplies. Because if those 7,000 troops reach Lae, American and Australian soldiers will pay for it in blood on jungle battlefields where the enemy already holds every advantage terrain can provide. Kenny has the aircraft to do it. He has B-17 flying fortresses for high-altitude bombing. He has B-25 Mitchells, both conventional bombers and Pappy Gunn's starter conversions. He has A-20 Havocks, similarly modified. He has P-38 Lightning fighters for escort and strafing. And he has a new tactic that has been tested in smaller engagements, but never against a target this large, this well-defended, this important. Skip bombing. The concept is simple in theory, terrifying in execution. A bomber approaches its target at extremely low altitude, 200 feet or less, sometimes as low as 50 feet above the waves. At point-blank range, perhaps a quarter mile from the target, the bomber releases its bombs with a slight upward trajectory. The bombs skip across the water like flat stones thrown by children at a pond, except these stones weigh 500 pounds and contain high explosives. They skip once, twice, then slam into the ship's hull at or below the waterline, exactly where naval architects know a ship is most vulnerable. The explosion opens the hull to the sea. The ship floods. The ship sinks. But skip bombing requires pilots to fly directly at heavily armed warships through walls of anti-aircraft fire, low enough that a single mistake means hitting the water and disintegrating, slow enough that enemy gunners have time to aim, close enough that if the bomb detonates prematurely, the attacking aircraft gets caught in its own blast. It requires nerves of steel and perfect timing. It requires aircraft that can suppress the anti-aircraft fire long enough for the bomber to release its ordnance and escape. It requires Pappy Gunn's Strafer B-25s. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea begins on March 2nd, 1943. The Japanese convoy departs Rabaul, steaming southwest through the Solomon Sea toward the Huon Gulf and Lae. Australian reconnaissance aircraft spot the convoy and shadow it, reporting position and course. General Kenny mobilizes his air groups. Bombers and fighters take off from bases throughout New Guinea and northern Australia. The weather is terrible, heavy clouds, rain squalls, poor visibility. But the weather works in the Allies' favour, allowing aircraft to approach unseen until the last moment. The first attacks are conventional. B-17 Flying Fortresses bomb from altitude on March 2nd, and 3rd, scoring few hits but forcing the convoy to manoeuvre constantly, slowing its progress. Then the weather clears on the morning of March 3rd, and Kenny unleashes the strafers. The modified B-25s and A-20s come in low, so low that their propellers are churning spray from the wavetops. They approach in formation, a wall of aircraft bearing down on the convoy at 200 miles per hour. The Japanese ships see them coming. Anti-aircraft guns open fire. 20mm and 25mm cannons throw up walls of explosive shells. Heavier 40mm guns pump rounds in arcing trajectories. The sky fills with tracer fire, with black puffs of exploding shells, with the smoke and fury of desperate defense, and then the strafers open fire. 14 50-caliber machine guns per aircraft, multiple aircraft attacking simultaneously, thousands of rounds per second hammering into Japanese ships. The effect is apocalyptic. Anti-aircraft gun crews are scythed down where they stand. Gun shields are perforated like paper. Bridge windows shatter. Superstructures are shredded. The armor-piercing rounds punch through light armor, ricochet off steel bulkheads, tear through wooden structures, set fires, detonate ammunition. The Japanese gunners who survived the initial onslaught find themselves suppressed, unable to aim, unable to fire, forced to take cover as half-inch bullets tear apart everything around them. And in that window of suppressed fire, the skip-bombing B-25s and conventional Mitchells release their loads. 500-pound bombs skip across the water. Some miss war is never perfect, but many hit. They slam into hulls below the waterline. They explode with the force of half a ton of high explosive concentrated against the weakest part of the ship's structure. Steel plates buckle. Welds fail. The sea pours in. The transport ships, heavily laden with troops and supplies, are particularly vulnerable. They're not warships. They don't have armored hulls or sophisticated damage control. When the bombs hit, when the hulls open to the Pacific, they begin sinking immediately. Troops below decks, trapped in compartments that are flooding, have nowhere to go. The ships settle lower in the water, list to one side, then capsize or break apart and slide beneath the waves. The destroyers fare better their warships, designed to take punishment, but even they cannot withstand the coordinated assault. One destroyer takes a bomb amidships and breaks in half. Another is so riddled with 50-caliber fire that it becomes unmanageable, drifting in circles as fires rage unchecked. A third destroyer, trying to rescue survivors from a sinking transport, is caught by strafers and turned into a funeral pyre. The battle continues for 3 days. Every time the Japanese try to rescue survivors, Allied aircraft appear. Every time a damaged ship tries to limp away, it's attacked again. The strafer B-25s hunt like wolves, working in coordination with conventional bombers, with fighters, with reconnaissance aircraft spotting targets. They use the new parachute fragmentation bombs, floating them down over the decks of destroyers, killing exposed personnel, starting fires, creating chaos. They strafe lifeboats and debris fields not out of cruelty, but because those survivors are soldiers who, if rescued, will fight again on New Guinea's battlefields. By March 4th, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was over. The results are staggering. All 8 transport ships sunk, 4 destroyers sunk, 3 others heavily damaged. Approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers were killed in the sinking ships or in the water. Fewer than 1,000 reach land, and most of those are immediately captured or killed by Allied forces. The reinforcement effort is annihilated. The supplies that were supposed to sustain the Japanese garrison at Leh for months are at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Allied losses: 4 aircraft shot down, 13 aircrew killed or missing. It is one of the most one-sided victories in the history of warfare. And at the center of it, making it possible, are Pappy Gunn's modified B-25s, the strafers that suppressed defensive fire, that allowed the skip bombers to approach, that tore Japanese ships apart with concentrated machine gun fire. General Kenny immediately orders more conversions. Word spreads throughout the theatre. Other air forces want the strafers. The 13th Air Force sends B-25s to Brisbane for conversion. Depot engineers at Tontota begin modifying aircraft. The 10th Air Force in India picks up the modifications. What began as one man's desperate improvisation in a tin hangar in Queensland becomes standard practice across the Pacific. But the story doesn't end with tactical success, because North American aviation, back in California, has been watching. The factory representatives have been sending reports about Gunn's modifications. Engineers in Long Beach have been studying the results, and they've begun incorporating Gunn's innovations into new production models. In late 1943, North American introduced the B-25G model. The transparent nose is gone, replaced by a solid metal nose housing a 75mm M4 cannon, a tank gun, mounted in an aircraft, firing 3-pound high-explosive shells that can engage ships from 2 miles away and sink smaller vessels with a single hit. 4 50-caliber machine guns supplement the cannon. The concept is innovative. The execution is problematic. The 75mm cannon produces tremendous recoil. Each time it fires, the entire aircraft shudders. Pilots struggle to keep the aircraft stable. The cannon is manually loaded, slow to reload, and quickly exhausts its limited ammunition supply. After 7 weeks of combat, units equipped with the B-25G have expended all their 75mm ammunition. The cannon-armed Mitchells are an interesting experiment, but ultimately they prove less effective than Pappy Gunn's simpler solution: more machine guns. The B-25H model appears next 1,000 aircraft built with even more machine guns. The 75mm cannon is replaced with a lighter 14-gun version, 8 in the nose, 4 in side blisters, 2 in the dorsal turret. Some H models also carry rockets, 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, that can be ripple-fired in devastating salvos. But the ultimate expression of Pappy Gunn's vision is the B-25J, introduced in 1944. North American builds over 4,000 J models. Many are delivered with transparent noses for conventional bombing, but the air depot system creates conversion kits, the strafer nose option. When a J model is converted to a strafer, it carries 18 50-caliber machine guns, 8 in the nose, 4 in the fuselage packages, 2 in the dorsal turret, 1 in each waist position, and 2 in the tail. 14 of those 18 guns fire directly forward, 18 50-caliber machine guns on a single aircraft, 15,300 rounds per minute combined rate of fire, over 250 rounds per second. A B-25J strafer, firing all forward guns simultaneously, puts more lead into the air than an entire infantry company could fire with their rifles. The effect on targets is not destruction, it's disintegration. These heavily armed Mitchells continued to devastate Japanese targets throughout New Guinea, the Philippines, and Okinawa until the end of the war. They strafe airfields, destroying parked aircraft. They attack bridges, severing supply lines. They hunt coastal barges and small vessels. They support ground troops with devastating close air support. They are so effective that captured enemy documents warn Japanese forces not to attack when the strafers' overhead weapons are useless against them, and attacking will only infuriate the monsters. The strafer crews develop their own tactics and their own reputation. They fly low enough to see the expressions on enemy soldiers' faces. They approach from unexpected angles over mountains, up valleys, along coastlines, using terrain to mask their approach until the last second. They work in coordination with each other, one aircraft suppressing fire while another delivers the killing blow. They are feared, they are hated, they are merciless, and behind every one of those aircraft is Pappy Gunn's desperate fury, channeled into engineering, transformed into lethality. Major Gunn promoted for his innovations, and his combat record is eventually sent back to the United States to oversee factory production of the new B-25 variants at North American Aviation. It's a recognition of his contributions, an acknowledgement that his field modifications have been so successful they need to be incorporated into production aircraft. But Gunn doesn't want recognition. He wants to be in the Pacific, fighting, killing Japanese, shortening the war that holds his family hostage. He returns to the Pacific as soon as he can. He continues flying combat missions. He continues taking risks that make his commanders nervous. In late 1944, a Japanese bombing attack on Leyte in the Philippines catches him on the ground. He's wounded his 9th Purple Heart badly enough that he's removed from active combat. The war continues without him, but by then, the strafer program he pioneered is so thoroughly integrated into Pacific air operations that it no longer needs him. In February 1945, American forces liberated Manila. They fight house to house, building to building, against fanatical Japanese defenders who would rather die than surrender. On February 3rd, American troops reached the University of Santo Tomas. They find over 3,000 internees, starving, sick, traumatized by 3 years of captivity. Among them are Clara Louise Gunn and her 4 children. Pappy Gunn is reunited with his family. They're alive, barely, malnourished, traumatized, forever marked by their ordeal, but alive. The war he fought to shorten, the modifications he made, the missions he flew, the Japanese he killed, all of it was for this moment. His family survives. The Philippines are liberated. The war grinds toward its conclusion. Gunn retired from the Army Air Forces as a full colonel on June 30th, 1948, medically retired due to his accumulated wounds. He returns to the Philippines to rebuild Philippine Airlines, the airline he helped start before the war. The company expands, provides flights across the South Pacific, and becomes one of the region's major carriers. Gunn flies again, not in combat but in commerce, carrying passengers and cargo instead of guns and fury. On October 11, 1957, Colonel Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn died when his chartered Beech 18 crashed in a storm over the Philippines. He's 57 years old. He's survived 21 years in the Navy, 5 years of brutal combat in the Pacific War, 9 combat wounds, countless close calls, and the loss of nearly everything he cared about during the dark years when his family was imprisoned. A storm over the islands he loved finally claims him, but his legacy endures. The strafer concept he pioneered doesn't die with him. During the Korean War, Modified B-25s provided close air support using the same tactics Gunn developed. The principal heavy forward-firing armament on a stable platform becomes doctrine. In the 1960s, when the United States began developing gunships for Vietnam, the engineers looked back at Pappy Gunn's work. They study his modifications. They understand his insight, that sometimes the best weapon isn't the newest or the most technologically advanced, but the one that puts the most firepower exactly where it needs to be. The AC-47 Spooky, the first modern gunship, uses sideways firing guns and a pylon turn, a different approach than Gunn's forward-firing strafers, but the same understanding that transport and bomber aircraft can be converted into devastating gunships. The AC-130 Spectre, still flying today with 105mm howitzers and sophisticated targeting systems, is a direct descendant of Gunn's vision. Take an aircraft designed for one purpose, modify it for another, and create a weapon so effective it changes how wars are fought. Every Air Force close air support doctrine written since the 1940s acknowledges, implicitly or explicitly, that Pappy Gunn was right, that